Port authorities are bracing for a major impact. According to Port of Seattle Commissioner Ryan Culkins, there could be a 40% drop in vessels in container traffic the next few weeks.
Of the lowest levels on record amid a fierce trade war.
The United States will soon face likely supply chain issues as the last.
For decades, the United States was the nerve center of the global economy, the place where goods, energy, and information all passed through by default. Every trade route, every supply chain, every flow of capital seemed to either start, stop, or pass through America. But in 2025, that map is being redrawn, and the new coordinates point north. According to data from the Global Trade Monitor and the Peterson Institute, more than $700 billion in global trade value is quietly shifting out of the United States and into Canada. This isn't a forecast. It's already happening in 5 major corridors that underpin the modern economy. Canada now controls an estimated $120 billion in critical battery minerals and electrification components, $76 billion in cross-border energy deals, $89 billion in agriculture exports, $61 billion in artificial intelligence and data infrastructure, and $68 billion in container logistics and shipping. Together, these sectors represent the arteries of 21st century global trade, and they're no longer running through America. Instead of Long Beach or Houston, the world's cargo ships are docking in Halifax and Vancouver. Instead of Silicon Valley or New York, AI and data are flowing through Toronto and Montreal. Ontario, Quebec, and Saskatchewan are becoming the new logistical capitals. Quietly, strategically, Canada is taking the lead, not with slogans, but with infrastructure contracts and consistency. The United States hasn't just lost contracts. It's losing control of the routes, the flows, and the trust that once made it irreplaceable. And the most unsettling part, it didn't happen because of war. It didn't take a collapse or a catastrophe. It happened while Washington was still debating tariffs and catchphrases.
Well, Canada's gross domestic product in the first quarter of the year up by 0.5%. That's in comparison to the 0.6% increase in the fourth quarter of last year. Mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction were among the main drivers of the GDP growth in Q1, and manufacturing saw an upturn for the first time since the first quarter of 2023.
If trade is the body of the global economy, batteries are the bloodstream. They power everything from your phone and laptop to electric vehicles, defense systems, and the grid itself. For years, the US believed it would lead the world into the electric era. With Tesla in California, Ford in Michigan, and Panasonic gigafactories springing up across the country, America seemed poised to dominate the battery supply chain. But in 2025, that assumption collapsed quietly and with surgical precision. It started with a piece of legislation most Americans never heard of, Bill 142, passed by the province of Ontario in March 2025. The bill didn't announce a ban or impose a tax. It simply required government approvals for any export involving 11 key strategic minerals, including lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all vital for electric vehicle batteries. The result was immediate and devastating. Within weeks, more than 63% of cathode orders scheduled for U.S. delivery in April and May were either delayed or outright canceled, according to Michigan's Industrial Materials Association. What followed was a quiet but brutal reshuffling of supply lines. Companies like GM, POSCO Canada, originally producing cathodes for U.S. automakers, began retooling their factories to meet European technical standards. Toronto became a hub for contract renegotiations with the EU. Halifax, once a sleepy Atlantic port, was designated as a cold chain export terminal for battery shipments heading directly to Hamburg and Rotterdam. The U.S. was cut out not by hostility, but by efficiency. The economic pain hit fast. In Michigan, battery component suppliers began laying off workers or scaling back production. In Ohio and Indiana, secondary plants assembling battery cells reported Q2 sales drops of more than 20%. Even tech firms in Pennsylvania that supported Apple's battery diagnostics had to redirect orders to Asia, citing material shortages from Canada. The downstream consequences were immediate. The price of nickel sulfate, a key cathode material, jumped over 40% per ton as the U.S. scrambled to source from Indonesia instead. Consumers began to notice, too. A Ford F-150 Lightning, once considered an affordable EV for American families, now costs $200 more per unit. Meanwhile, the same model built in Europe, powered by Canadian battery minerals, has held its price. The Peterson Institute estimates the U.S. could lose over $38 billion in direct battery manufacturing value in 2025 alone, not including the cascading impact on EV production electronics and even national defense systems that depend on high-performance energy storage. All of this not because of a trade war, not because of a boycott, but because Canada simply controlled the upstream. And when you lose control of the lifeblood of 21st century technology, it doesn't matter how advanced your factories are. They have nothing left to run on.
We will go to the full extent, depending how far this goes. We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going down to New York State, and over to Wisconsin.
In the summer of 2025, something changed in American homes, and it wasn't the heat. It was the electricity bill. Residents in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota opened their June statements to find shocking surcharges. For many, the cost of keeping the lights on and the AC running had jumped by 20 to 25% almost overnight. But this wasn't because of a blackout or a spike in demand. It was because the power that keeps much of the U.S. Northeast cool in the summer no longer flows freely from Canada. For years, hydroelectric plants in Quebec and Ontario provided cheap, stable energy to U.S. border states. It was quiet cooperation, no headlines, just megawatts. But in May 2025, everything shifted. After Washington imposed new tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, Canada responded not with words, but with electricity pricing. Suddenly, American utility companies were hit with higher cross-border rates. The Northeast Energy Association confirmed the shift, and J.P. Morgan analysts estimated immediate wholesale power cost spikes of up to 25% per megawatt hour. And while Americans struggled to cool their homes, Canada was busy exporting that same electricity elsewhere for more money. In early June, Canada signed long-term energy contracts with Ireland, Belgium, and the Netherlands, offering Europe not only cleaner power but also price stability and long-term guarantees, something the U.S. grid tied up in tariff politics could no longer offer. The difference was staggering. According to the Financial Post, the electricity price Canada negotiated with European buyers was nearly twice what it charged the U.S. over the past decade. And it wasn't just short-term contracts. Canada is now completing a transatlantic ultra-high voltage cable from Churchill Falls, Quebec to the Irish coast, scheduled for full operation in 2028. Once online, that line will bypass the U.S., entirely sending clean energy straight into the European grid. At home, the effects are personal. Seniors on fixed incomes in Detroit are rationing IC. Small businesses in Buffalo are delaying hours to cut power use. And all the while, Canadian provinces are earning billions and investing in new energy infrastructure for themselves and their export partners. Electricity isn't supposed to be political, but when tariffs disrupt the power lines and a neighboring country can offer more reliable service to Europe than to you, the loss goes far beyond kilowatts. It becomes a question of who really holds the switch. In 2025, the global food market quietly shifted. Japan chose Canadian wheat over U.S. supply for the first time in 30 years. South Korea signed a beef deal with Calgary. The EU increased soybean imports from Canada by 40%. Why? Because they no longer trusted the U.S. to deliver. Back home, labor shortages paralyzed American farms. After sweeping immigration crackdowns, fields in Nebraska were left untouched, over 1 million tons of corn unharvested. In California, crops were set on fire due to lack of workers. Illinois farmers lost export deals. Kansas farmers gave up and walked away. Meanwhile, Canada broke records exporting over $89.2 billion in agri-products in just 6 months. Jobs surged. Exports arrived on time. Contracts held steady. The result, grocery shelves in Tokyo and Rotterdam now carry products labeled Canada-grown, not made in America. And for U.S. farmers, the scariest part isn't that they're being replaced. It's that no one even had to announce it. While containers and crops are visible signs of decline, some of the most strategic losses are silent, like code data and algorithms. In 2025, global tech investors quietly shifted their bets. AI investment in Canada surged 31%, while the U.S. lagged far behind at just 6%. Tech giants took notice. Google expanded its Toronto AI lab, while Vancouver and Montreal became magnets for engineers from India, Europe, and even the U.S. Why? Because Canada offered what Washington couldn't: stability. A new agreement between Canada and the EU on secure data and decentralized AI systems turned Canada into a trusted digital partner. The result, Canada now controls over $61 billion in global AI and data infrastructure. America still has the talent, but increasingly that talent is crossing the border. And the fallout doesn't end in the cloud. It lands hard in the real world through ports, railways, and routes once built to serve U.S. dominance. What good is building batteries, growing food, or coding algorithms if you can't ship them? In the first half of 2025, the North American Freight Alliance reported U.S. container traffic dropped by 12.7%, while Canada's ports surged by 26%. Carriers like Maersk and CMA CGM rerouted from Seattle to Vancouver and Halifax. The final blow, CPKC launched a seamless corridor from Mexico to Halifax, bypassing Chicago entirely and cutting transport time by 5 full days. That one move saved millions in logistics costs. But for America, it came at a high price, $22.5 billion in lost port revenue and 27,000 jobs gone, many in states already hanging by a thread. And this is where the data and the damage collide. The loss isn't just in billions, it's in people. In Ohio, battery workers are being laid off. In Seattle, engineers are updating their LinkedIn to jobs in Toronto. In New Jersey, container drivers are switching to local gigs. In Iowa, farmers see contracts vanish overnight. For millions of Americans, the shift isn't something they read about. They're living it through canceled orders, shrinking hours, rising bills. Most won't hear about Ontario's mining law or Halifax's shipping boom, but they know something's changed. The economy feels harder, the paychecks feel smaller, and no one's explaining why. That's because it's not just one policy or one industry collapsing, it's the whole system rerouting and leaving the US behind. If batteries no longer pass through Detroit, if electricity no longer flows to New York, if the food in Tokyo comes from Saskatchewan, if your AI is trained in Toronto and the container leaves Halifax, not Long Beach, then what does America still lead? Because leadership isn't a flag, it's not a slogan. It's the ability to deliver on time at scale and without question. And right now, Canada is doing exactly that. Not with headlines, but with contracts, cables, and corridors. One by one, the arteries of global trade are shifting, and the US is left watching from the sidelines. This isn't a collapse, it's a quiet handover. The only question is, did anyone notice it in time? Because if not, this story isn't just about Canada replacing the US, it's about how quietly that replacement can happen without a single vote speech or headline. If this shifted how you see America's global role, like the video. Subscribe to follow the next silent realignments in trade tech and power. And tell us in the comments, is the US still leading or is it already being replaced? The next corridor might not move through ports or power grids. It could be digital currency, and it's coming fast.